Tēnā tātou, ngā mihi o te wā, mō tēnei hui whakamutunga, mō policy and planning, ka nui te mihi me te aroa ki a koutou. Just a warm welcome to this extraordinary policy and planning hui today. Definitely our final hui for the term. We anticipate, yes, nods all round. So thank you all for making the time. Online we have Charlotte, we have Mitch, we have Tuhiao, Peter, and our guests, Anna and Becky, whom Finbar will introduce formally when it's his time to the microphone. But welcome to you all online and thank you for joining us. We can kick off with our karakia timatanga. Wakataka te hau ki te uru, wakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, kia hi ake ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tūturu o whiti, whakamaua kia tīna, tīna. Tai. Kia ora. We have apologies this morning from Councillor Hughes and Leadham and Councillor McIntyre. May I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor. Seconder? Thanks, Craig. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That's carried. Kia ora. We have no deputations this morning, and as I understand it, submissions have been opened publicly, so people are able to make direct submissions to the...
Not quite publicly, to a selected list of people, but it's pretty broad.
Okay. Yeah. So that's good to know that people can make that input from themselves. And we will move on to the kaupapa for today. Please, Finbar. Kia koe te wā. Please introduce your guests.
Good morning, everyone. I'll take the paper and written comment as read. We just have a presentation to take you through the salient points. But before that, I just wanted to introduce you to the team who've been involved in the written comment, and they're here to help answer any questions. Firstly, we'll know Thomas McElroy, who has managed the work with PDP in terms of the environmental effects. You'll know Gary Bedford, who has provided a range of advice on the application, particularly with regards to the air quality emissions, the incident and the liability and that aspect of things. We've got Doug Fairgray, the Director at Market Economics. He produced the review of the applicant's economic impact assessment. And then we have Anna Maduras-Smith, the Technical Director Coastal at PDP, and Becky Shanahan, the Service Leader Coastal at PDP. So they produced that environmental report in terms of reviewing those key environmental effects for us. So they'll be available to answer questions at the end. I'll field them. In terms of a brief overview, I will first provide just a short overview of what the application is itself again, just to refresh you on that. Then talk about the process and where we are in the legislation in terms of that context, and then step into the written comment itself. So this is that area which says Cook South. That is the application area in terms of mining. That's about 66 kilometres squared. And so you can see that that purple line is the boundary between the coastal marine area and the EEZ. And the EEZ. So outside our jurisdiction, but abutting the CMA, which is. In terms of what is proposed, this is just an image, a mocked-up image, obviously, of the integrated mining vessel. This would be the heart of the operation. It's a big boat, 345 metres long, yet to be built. And what the application would actually involve is, so attached to that vessel is, I'm going to grossly simplify, a big sand vacuum cleaner, which cruises along the seabed and sucks up the iron sands. That gets pumped up into the integrated mining vessel, ran through some big giant magnets, which pull out the iron ore. And so it's about 10% of the weight of iron ore, and then the remaining 90% of the sediment goes down that pipe and gets deposited back on the seabed, and then the vessel kind of trundles along, up and down, extracting the iron ore. Once it's been extracted using the integrated mining vessel, it is pumped as a slurry through a pipe to the floating storage and offloading vessel, which has a capacity of about 60,000 tonnes. And when the time comes, that trundles off to another location, ships the iron ore concentrate into a bulk carrier, then that trundles off to market to export it. So that's the bulk of it. Obviously, there's much more detail that goes with it, but that's the kind of core of what's proposed. So where we are in the process, the panel is now being established, and you can see the panel members there, noting Loretta Lovell, who is the local authority nominee from council. The panel convener has given the panel until the 18th of March next year to issue their decision. And you'll see in the memo we've outlined the reasons for giving quite a long period to consider that. The crux of it is it's a complicated application, and the panel convener also wanted to make sure the panel had plenty of time to hold hearings and conferencing if they so wanted. And just to summarise the legislative context, as this is the context which our written comment has to operate within. So the purpose of the Fast Track Approvals Act is to facilitate the delivery of projects with significant regional or national benefits. And that purpose, as the expert panel goes through their deliberations, that purpose has to be given greater weighting than the big old list of stuff they have to consider under the EEZ Act. The panel can only decline an application if it finds that the adverse effects are sufficiently significant to be out of proportion to the project's regional or national benefits. So that's the key wording from the Act, and so you see that in our written comment in terms of some of the overall conclusions. And that overrides any bottom line. So a bottom line is like we might have a policy in our coastal plan that says you have to do something, and if you don't do it, it's just like pretty much an instant no to a resource consent application. None of those apply here. All that matters in terms of a decline is that third bullet point. And so in our process is to provide written comment to the expert panel to assist them as they work through their decision making under the Fast Track Approvals Act. So, bottom line up front in terms of the submission and its overall conclusions. The project would likely have a significant gross economic benefit, but due to the information uncertainty, we cannot make a judgment about the net economic benefit. So that's the benefit after costs, including on the environment, have been taken into account. There remains considerable uncertainty regarding the adverse effects, and the ones that we are particularly concerned about are the seabird, marine mammals, and reef species that are out there. And because of this uncertainty, and the time pressures involved in the expert panel's deliberations, much will hinge on how they decide to take into account the requirement to favour caution and environmental protection. So it's a requirement to favour caution and environmental protection when you've got information deficiencies under the EEZ Act, but under the Fast Track Approvals Act, the panel has to take that into account, which gets really complicated, but it's a slightly lesser it slightly lessens the test, but it's still really important. And because of all this, we think the decision of the panel will be finely balanced, and they'll have their work cut out for them, kind of unpicking all this stuff. And because of all that, in terms of speaking to that overall test in the Act, we think that the possibility that the adverse effects are sufficiently significant to be out of proportion with the project's regional national benefits at this stage, you can't rule it out. So it is there is a chance that the panel will reach that conclusion based on what we've seen in the application. But obviously, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge still. So stepping into these things a little bit more, in terms of the economics, it's important that the specifics in the application can't be divorced from our regional context. And that regional context is that we are facing serious economic headwinds as a region, primarily due to the decline in the oil and gas sector and the flow-on impacts of that in terms of jobs in the regional economy. And in that context, the jobs and the GDP contribution that the project is estimated to make, which you'll see there, are likely significant. Again, at that net level, we can't make a judgment about. So at the gross level, we can't make a judgment about the net level yet. And one thing that we noticed as well, in the application, there's a bit of ambiguity on, in terms of the jobs that would be created, how many of those people would actually live in Taranaki, as opposed to maybe being based in Wellington or being fly in, fly out. And so we'd like to just get a little more clarity on how the applicant is thinking about those matters. In terms of the environmental effects, so when this went through the previous EEZ, the Supreme Court issued this decision, and in that decision they found that there was inadequate information regarding marine mammals, seabirds and the plume. As we've been going through the application, our conclusion is that those concerns remain largely unaddressed, and there is a lack of substantive new work on the side of the applicant. They have done some stuff around marine mammals, like summarising the work of others and kind of making their conclusions, but as far as work that kind of actually improves either our understanding of the receiving environment or the adverse effects on that environment, there's not much new in the application. And what we're being particularly concerned about, as you can see there, the species that we think are particularly pertinent. And also for the Regional Council, you might recall a few years ago now that we put up a report to you, the Morrison et al. Report, which did a survey of the coastal marine area and found a whole lot of these rocky reefs dotted around. And then also the Project Reef and North and South Traps are areas of outstanding natural character that are protected under our coastal plan. So they're pretty important sites. So this is just to provide a little bit of context of the application. Don't look into the detail. This is an image, one of many images of the plume. There's many different ways to measure the plume and it gets super complicated. All I want you to take away from this is the general direction and scale of the plume. So you see, and this is only from one site right on the boundary, but you do see the plume is basically largely within our jurisdiction, hence why the adverse effects on those sites are quite important. Potential adverse effects, I should say. So this is an image that PDP produced. So you can see those letters there, A, B, D, J. They're sites from that Rocky Reef report, so where they found rocky reefs. And you can also see Project Reef on there and the North and South Traps. And those red lines are about, I think, 20 kilometres, so within the general vicinity of the plume. And this is just an image of Project Reef, which is always quite nice to actually see what's down there, since many of us probably don't get down in the south underwater in the South Taranaki Bight very often. I'd have to defer to Thomas in terms of the actual species and stuff, but it's just a quick visual representation of some of these rocky reefs. And again, I don't want you to look too much into the detail of it. This is a relatively, from 2017, I think, a study of little penguins from Marlborough Sounds. And you can actually see that, at least in the incubation stage of their raising eggs, they do travel pretty far. So that darker grey area is where they're more concentrated. So they are travelling quite far to gather food. So from this, I just want you to take that there are vulnerable species out there, but the extent of adverse effect gets a lot more complicated. And similarly, this is a map of marine mammal sightings from the DOC database. So you can see not too much within the actual application area itself, but within the wider South Taranaki Bight, there is quite a lot. And that's why you see references in a lot of material about this application that, and this is somewhat contested, but the South Taranaki Bight being a hotspot for marine mammal activity, and then lots of people arguing whether that's inside or outside the vicinity of the application. But again, just taking from it, there's stuff out there that really matters in terms of species. And then in terms of, you'll see that our application also, written comment talked about a lot of things that weren't purely environmental effects in the application, well, and some that are. So one thing that we noticed that hasn't been given any consideration is the impact of the sulfur dioxide emissions from these big old vessels burning heavy fuel oil 24/7. And so that sulfur turns into sulfuric acid, which eventually finds its way into the ocean. That we'd just like to see a bit more assessment on what those effects potentially might be. And there's some issues around the application in terms of some lack of clarity. The sediment quality guidelines in terms of toxicity, the level that's in the proposed consent conditions is at one that if you actually get to that level, bad stuff is already happening. So we're saying, well, actually, no, the threshold should be below when you're seeing toxicity effects. And then quite a lot that we've devoted to the risk around an incident, oil spill response, and liability. I want to stress, of course, that these are anything to do like that is an incredibly low probability event. But the combined fuel capacity of those two main vessels is 55,000 tonnes of heavy fuel oil. So while the probability of something going wrong is like super low, the impact, the consequence could be really, really high. So we'd like to see a bit more attention to that and a bit more consideration through the conditions. Then a few other things around accidental discovery of human remains. Again, low probability, but easy to put a protocol in place. And what the applicant would do if a rahui was put in place, the grounding area, how they would respond. And finally, again, because of the information deficiencies, we haven't been able to do a definitive assessment against the provisions in our coastal plan in particular. However, we have highlighted to the panel ones which we think are at risk of being incompatible with the application. So in terms of next steps, those question marks are ones where we need to wait and see what the panel wants to do, but they might ask us for more information. We might get pulled into expert conferencing to nut over the issues, and we might get pulled into a hearing or something like that in terms of that, to provide more comment. And if the panel does decide to grant the application, we will get an opportunity to provide further information on the draft consent conditions, hence why we haven't gone like with a fine-tooth comb through those at this stage. These steps potentially will all happen quite quickly. You know, we're talking to the end of the year and we're going to have to be quite nimble and do quite a lot of work in short timeframes. So hence why we're seeking your approval for those steps to be exercised through the chief, delegated to the chief executive, just so we can respond as quickly as possible to the demands of what will be a fairly intense process. I'll leave it there. Sorry, that was quite long, but as you appreciate, it's quite a complicated beast. And yes, happy to take any questions, either myself or I'll pass to others as needed.
Kia ora, thank you, Finbar. I have Neil.
Firstly, I'd just like to say I think Finbar's done a very balanced and sensible proposal here and covered a lot of bases. Just very quickly to ask, I've got 5 short questions that you might like to answer. Firstly, does the panel have the right to look at what's being done and suggest you can't do it this way, but you have to do it that way? In other words, can they severely modify what the applicant wants to do and say, okay, you can, but you've got to do these other things? The second question very quickly is, what would we need to do to really assess the animal situation? In other words, what should have been done perhaps, or what could you have done, or what should they have done to assess that?
Neil, can we let Finbar answer those 2 first and then come back to you in case the questions get lost in?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, with regards to your first question, yes. So the panel could impose consent conditions which shape how the applicant wants to operate. You always need to be very careful when imposing conditions that you can't frustrate the exercise of the consent. However, the process does also say that, say if the panel was to go, well, under this current model, we're going to decline you, they have to go back to the applicant and say, hey, unless you change your application, we're going to decline this. So they give the applicant an opportunity to come back and change or suggest. And I imagine that might be a bit of a two-way dialogue. In terms of your second question around assessing what additional work could have been done, there's probably a lot to unpack there. There's been, in terms of seabirds, the big gaps are just like a lack of good survey data in terms of what's out there. Similarly, that's been a lot of point of contention with regards to marine mammals and the quality of assessing what's out there. And then the plume, they've done more sediment modelling, but we highlight in our written comment that sediment modelling, some of the conclusions aren't taken through into the other models that they run off as models on top of models on top of models. But I'll pass to PDP there just to get their comments as well and where they think the further work might be best concentrated if they had the time.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Anna Marara Smith tōku ingoa.
Oh, ko Becky Shanahan tōku ingoa.
Thank you for having us here today. And Finbar, I think you did an excellent job of answering that question. I don't think I have a huge amount to add. Most of what was discussed regarding the application and the DMC decision later on was the lack of that information in which to assess the impact on policies and policies, particularly within regards to marine mammals and seabirds. When you've asked a question about what else needs to be done to assess those impacts, there are recommendations throughout the process around some more systematic surveys. Now, whether they were done pre-application or as part of a baseline approach does depend on the type of legislation that you're trying to address the question under. I do note that the Supreme Court noted that you couldn't actually condition out requirements to gather fundamental information because you were unable to assess the actual impact of the effects of that activity. A couple of things to note. One is with marine mammals. Probably the key issues with marine mammals come down to the noise, and there is new best practice around that. So that is probably, it needs to be decided through the process. And again, foraging, which efficacy, which comes down to that the sediment plume. Similarly, with seabirds and shorebirds, there's been sort of a consistent lack or acknowledgement of a lack of a detailed survey or design with which to assess the impacts on effects and flow-on effects on policies. Again, that comes down to things like the effect of lighting, artificial lighting of the integrated vessel, but also that sediment plume. So I might hand over to Becky with regard to the sediment plume.
Yeah, I mean, Finbar basically covered it there. It's just a matter of they did do some comprehensive sediment modeling, which is really helpful, but they didn't actually, one, follow it through on what impacts it's going to have on the species that need the sunlight. So to find out how much the plume is going to impact their ability to photosynthesize and grow and provide habitat. So that's one issue. And the other issue is that they didn't take into account that report that Finbar mentioned already, which has coverage of a lot more rocky reefs than was originally known when they first did those models. And so that hasn't really been brought into that newest application. And then the impacts on those new reefs worked through all the way. So it's hard to assess what those are.
More questions, Neil?
Yes, this one is about beaches. Obviously, you've got plume and you've got various maps here to show what might happen. Is this, have we assessed that this is going to change the nature of the beaches along this way? We know that sand, from Mount Taranaki coming down, travels around and it fills up the harbour here. What is the expected outcome of the sand plume in terms of the beaches, particularly those southern ones when you showed a map there which shows things drifting south? And the next question, very briefly, a couple of quick ones, is if in fact they go ahead and they set up these systems and there are conditions that are met to be interpreted and put in, and if that happens, who will check on them to see that they're being done? And if they aren't being done, does this process give the opportunity to shut down? Because after all, it's outside of our area in terms, seems to be in a sort of a, dare I say, grey area between various authorities, and I don't know whether the EPA has the power to shut people down and dust like that. And the last question is a little bit about what they do with the sand material. Now, it's just from an economic perspective, we're all concerned about the fact that we have lots of timber that's cut down in New Zealand, and then everything is just sent out of the country for processing. For example, is it appropriate that they should do that, or should it be economically a requirement to actually process the material in New Zealand in some way?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. With regards to the impact on beaches, this was something that we canvassed in our previous submissions on this on the application, and that we were satisfied that there would be no notable impact with regards to beaches in South Taranaki. So it's not something that we've re-canvassed in this submission. We remain satisfied on that one. With regards to enforcement, the EPA would be the main enforcement body, but throughout this process, we've been like, well, hey, come on, let us help as well, in terms of we would inevitably get involved. Like if if there are complaints, they will come to us rather than the EPA, we would expect, because those would become, that's what we would expect. And it depends on the wording of the consent conditions, but the applicant has proffered some consent conditions that if they are breached, they would need to cease operations. So they have proposed consent conditions around like sediment concentration. So they do this regular modelling, and if they find that there's too much suspended sediment in the water column in these sites, they would need to cease operations until that stops or can be addressed. Other consent conditions are probably, depends on the specifics of it, you might just get infringement and things like that. But in terms of what they do with the material, so the applicant is proposing at this stage that it would just be exported for sale and processed offshore. That why I'm no expert on smelting of ore. It is a pretty complicated, energy-intensive and chemically intensive process. To require them to set that up in New Zealand would almost certainly destroy the viability of the project. In saying that, the applicant has been doing some work investigating potential processes to extract the vanadium from the iron ore and things like that. So they are actively researching in terms of potential technologies for how you might process it. They might look to set something up in country at some point in the future, but that would be a long, long way away.
And can I just ask one follow-up question? Back to the conditions again. It just worries me a little bit that you're sort of operating almost in a no man's land, if you like, or no person's land in the middle there somewhere. So you've got us with the effects, which we complained about, and you've got the EPA on the other side that really I don't think has a way or official staff to go and monitor these things or check on it. So that seems to be quite a problem area for who is actually going to be responsible and who's going to hold the conditions in place if there is conditions.
Through you, Chair. I mean, the EPA does have a monitoring and enforcement team. I mean, they're already active in monitoring and enforcing the offshore oil operations in Taranaki, so they definitely have a presence here in the region. But again, it would be something that we would hope to have a pretty close working relationship with the EPA, just so we can ensure that those things are appropriately covered.
Steve, did you have some further comments?
I just think Finbar's really covering it again. You expect EPA and even ourselves would need to employ particular expertise if this thing went ahead to do the monitoring that we're required to do.
Thanks, Neil. Tuhiao, and then back to Celine.
Sorry, morning, Nakato. I've got two quite different questions, so I might just do one by one. The first is, I just noticed, and again, this has been going on for years with TTR, it's like there's really a lack of analysis of the effects on the wider economy, particularly fisheries, but also things like recreation, tourism, and health. Just wondering why that is, and if there's a way that can be addressed in the future.
Through you, Chair. So through the reconsideration process, there was quite a lot of discussion around the impacts on the fisheries industry. That was not something that we got into just due to a lack of expertise. And I note that there's been a wide variety of fisheries parties have been invited to provide written comments. So that'll have an opportunity for the panel to really unpick that in terms of existing interests. In terms of tourism and things like that, that's quite an interesting one. The Supreme Court canvassed this in the reconsideration. And it was primarily, so it got into kind of the idea of like future tourism in terms of the establishment of industries that haven't yet got off the ground. And so this is relevant with regards to offshore wind as well. And the Supreme Court basically supported the judgment that the decision-making committee made that if an industry is not imminent in terms of being established or not already established, they don't have much ability to take it into account in terms of if it's not there, you can't really, it's not really an existing interest that you factor in. So that one gets a bit more difficult, but definitely for existing interests, that the expert panel will have to tackle those, and I think they'll be looking a lot for the written comment from those parties.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm just reminded of some things I've heard from the local fishing club here down at Egmont Boat Club around when the seismic surveying started and the fisheries here were amazing. And then after they did that, they just said it's never recovered. So there's a lot of research that I think should be undertaken into the impacts. I know this is quite a new industry, of course, so it's hard to get examples, but yeah, I'm very concerned about that. But yeah, my other question is really around the process for our comment. So I understand the other district councils rejected the, what do we call this? The application. So I'm just curious what's the difference between their stance or their processes and ours, and that we can't have such a clear rejection of this proposal?
Through you, Chair. So how we've approached this is that we've been guided by what's in the Fast Track Approvals Act, and we've thought about this a lot. Ultimately, a state either in support or opposition of the application that does not speak to the specific decision-making criteria in the Act will likely be ignored by the panel because there's not much grounds for it to kind of matter, to be honest. In terms of the processes that some of the other district councils have gone through, I don't want to comment on that, but just to say that as we have gone through this application, and as you can appreciate in quite a lot of detail, it comes down to those information deficiencies whereby because of those information deficiencies, statements of support or opposition require evidence, and those are not there, and this is also the start of a process that needs to be worked through in terms of any of those positional statements need to maintain an open mind as well as we step through the rest of this process, because there are opportunities for those information deficiencies to be addressed. So I guess it all boils down to a statement of support or opposition within the framework that that Parliament has created doesn't really matter, to be honest, unless you're making a statement that you say you think the adverse effects are sufficiently significant to outweigh the regional and economic benefits. That's the statement that matters. And where we've got to is that currently you can't rule that in, you can't rule that out, but that's the job of the expert panel as this goes forward.
So couldn't you argue that because they haven't provided that information after years of being asked to do that, and that obviously they don't have time in the next, what have we got till March to provide that, so the likelihood of getting that information is so low that it should be rejected?
That's where, so we canvass this in our written comment. So we don't think there is the ability, there's probably not the ability to reject an application due to insufficient information. So that's where in our application we've emphasised very strongly that in taking into account that requirement to favour caution and environmental protection, the expert panel, when it's looking at these adverse effects, it should be conservative and assume a worst case. And what that worst case will be requiring caucusing amongst the experts to actually work out. But the applicant hasn't provided the information, so then you assume worst case and then you work through the regulatory tests from there in terms of what that might mean. So that's how we see that probably playing out in practice in terms of the current state of information.
Yeah, copper. Thank you.
Kia ora Tuhia. Got anything you want to add to that, Steve?
The only other comment I'd make is one of the critical differences of this process, of course, is the panel can commission its own advice. So it could go and seek specific advice dealing with what are considered to be important gaps in information.
Which may include coming back to this council.
Which could come back to
Right.
council or any of the other people, particularly given our role and some responsibilities in the coastal area, albeit neighbouring, then that certainly could, you could certainly expect that we may get further questions or ask for further comment down the line as if further information is gathered either by the panel or as required by the applicant and others.
Okay. So maintaining our, and Mitch is up here, maintaining our stance at this stage enables us to not be accused of prejudice and bias and predetermination, I guess, would be the bottom line. Okay, thank you. So I've got Celine and then Tom and then Donna and Mitch.
Just to reiterate Neil's point around how these any conditions that are placed on TTR are going to be monitored, is it worth making mention of that in this report, just to ensure that there's, I mean, we're going to need really clearly defined processes, and it's, it's probably only one paragraph or one sentence. But I kind of feel like we need to reiterate that, because the ball is going to probably fall fairly firmly in our court for some of that consent monitoring, should this be approved. So that'd be my 50 cents worth on that. Secondly, in terms of the public liability insurance and the remediation or reinstatement work, is a 5-year period, do you think, long enough? I mean, if there's some sort of catastrophic failure, and the obvious one, I suppose, is a fuel or oil spill of some description, one, who makes the call that the reinstatement is complete in the first place? And two, is a 5-year period actually long enough in terms, in the obviously unlikely event that there's some sort of catastrophic failure, very near the end of the proposed 30-year consent term.
Through you, Chair, with regards to the potential paragraph on monitoring enforcement, we've got some good paragraphs that we could take from our previous submissions on that, where we've talked about this quite eloquently, so we could very easily insert a paragraph around emphasising that point and how we want to work with the EPA.
Yeah, I mean, that's relevant to point 10.2, the recommendations there.
Yeah.
5 years doesn't seem like a very long time to me.
And on that point, we did actually think quite a lot about that, and we have similar concerns, to be honest, around whether 5 years was long enough. And you'll see under recommendation BB, we did actually insert that the panel review the term of the current assurances. So that's to capture that. Is a 5 years sufficient?
Yeah.
So yeah, we do definitely want them to look at that.
And I mean, it's clearly obvious that their public liability insurance is insufficient. And I think the professional liability is a salient point as well. And the last thing, just to touch again on the decision around the opposition to this proposal, and you might recall I spoke out about this last time when Debbie and Fiona showed up to speak to us about this. And I've thought long and hard about it because I would dearly love to publicly oppose, for this council to publicly oppose seabed mining, but I think I agree that it's important that we remain sitting on the fence, a better term. We're in a privileged position where we're going to be able to have a lot of input into the decision making, and I think if we're perceived to be biased, it may affect the panel's acceptance of our evidence. So that's my 50 cents worth on that. Thanks.
Celine you get a foot both ways because STDC and you're sitting at this committee,
yes.
So you're pretty protected. Right, just had a supplementary.
Yeah, supplementary question, just through you, Chair, just around shipping. You were saying about something that we majorly wrong, particularly around the fuel. Are you saying that should be for every single ship that goes through that area, or just specifically for this?
Through you, Chair, we think it warrants specific consideration in this application. I mean, you have these two huge ships that are going to be out there for 20 to 30 years, 365 days of the year, with a lee shore in terms of a relatively risky operating environment. And I'm not familiar with the standard liability and the like protections that are required for commercial shipping operations, but we don't, and again, as we kind of been putting this, we're not saying that this absolutely has to be done. These are matters that we think needs to be worked through the process and given appropriate consideration by the panel.
Cool, and just through you, Chair, it's not sitting on the fence, it's a balanced approach.
Okay, thank you. Tom, Donna, and then Mitch, please.
Yeah, Finbar, you talk a lot about the plume. I'm trying to get my head the bigger picture around this. We see a plume every time there's a flood and it dissipates. Are we likely to see this in 24/7 and making these beaches around the Wanganui, Foxton, Hamatangi area unswimmable year after year? Is that how big the plume's going to be? I mean, you're basing a lot of the discussion around this plume, sulfur dioxide and all those sort of things that are coming back into the reefs. How can we assess the plume and just how big is the impact likely to be? As you say, it's likely to go south rather than north. Is the seafood's going to be this browny, whatever colour it may be, 24/7? Is that the big effect?
Through you, Chair, and I'll turn to PDP after this to tell me that I'm wrong, but from what I understand of the plume, most people won't notice it. It's not going to have much of an impact in terms of like swimmability on beaches and things like that. What matters is when we're getting offshore into where these reefs are, while a lot of sediment comes down the Wanganui and the Waiwakaio, that's kind of quite flashy and kind of dissipates. But actually when you're getting out that offshore in terms of where those reefs are, there's not that much sediment there. and actually a relatively small amount of sediment from the plume can have quite large impacts on these reef ecosystems. So while and the applicant has also noticed though that when people are out diving these sites, noting that they're offshore, like you've got to get in a boat and go out there and dive them, there will be a noticeable reduction in like high quality visibility days throughout the year when you're diving and things like that. But I'll turn to you, Becky, in terms of the plume and what effects of it are kind of really pertinent.
Finbar, you really hit the nail on the head, to be honest. It isn't the impacts that we've sort of reviewed so far are less to do with the inshore and more to do with that offshore aspect where the water is normally clear. And so even a small amount of sediment is likely to impact these sort of reefs that are a bit more offshore. Also, it is in the application, they talk about how they're going to run the operation 24/7 for I don't know how many days exactly, 200 plus days a year. What that breakup per year looks like. They'll have downtime for various things to move the vessel from block to block, or other things, who knows, servicing and things like that happen. So it is different from, you're right, there is definitely big pushes of sediment, not only from rainfall, but from wave action offshore. That definitely happens. The difference in this situation is, even though the plume isn't going to be traveling the same direction 100% of the time because of currents and wind and all this stuff, it still is going to be a 24/7 push of plume for a much longer period of time than just a one-off storm event that may last a week and then clear. So that's sort of the big difference there.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Donna?
Mine was just, is there work we should be doing now, like the survey work, or is it just too late now? Like it would take too long? Well, it just seems like there is some missing information.
It's not our job to do the work for the applicant.
And through you, Chair, I mean, it's fair to say you're not going to be out there doing a comprehensive marine mammal survey between now and March next year. So where we focused our written comments on where we think there is further work, it's particularly on that more detailed assessment. So taking that Morrison report and actually properly assessing what that means in terms of the conclusions reached on the adverse effects. So that's where we expect. You might have a little bit of time for a little bit of modelling here and there, but even that's going to be pretty tight. So hence it comes back to how the panel is going to have to live with this uncertainty, and so how they choose to manage it through their decision making will be really important.
Thanks.
Kia ora, thanks, Donna. Mitch, kei a koe.
Kia ora. Just got one comment and one question. So throughout the discussion, we've heard that there's been, and that there is a lack of information. And particular ones that I've seen is in relation to the economic significance, and that's clarity around jobs based in the region and whether they'll be offered to local people, environmental settling and settlement plume, the gaps in not utilising the Morrison et al. Report, and wider ecological effects. Can the recommendations have more stronger wording? Because when I refer to those, like 29F, 32H, 34L, it uses words like seek clarification or consider. Can it actually be stronger wording and saying to require that these information gaps are filled? So that's the comment. I'd like to see more stronger wording. And the question is just in relation to cultural protocols. So great to see that there's been some inclusion there around koiwi and consideration for Rahui, but I'm not seeing anything in the written comment around how Mātauranga Māori applies to the situation. What consideration has been given to that?
Through you, Chair. With regards to the first question on the language, I think we probably can't recommend the panel require those information gaps to be filled, because again, they might not be able to. I would say that we probably could, we could probably strengthen that to say that rather than consider, we recommend that they address these information deficiencies through the process, because then again, that kind of speaks to that, making a judgment about the extent even within that uncertainty. So we could probably, I think we could strengthen that language.
Okay.
With regards to Mātauranga Māori, that is, it is definitely highly pertinent to the application. We haven't commented on it specifically on the grounds that we think that is better covered by some of the other parties who have been asked to provide written comment. And also the Supreme Court provided some very clear direction on this, which is still pretty relevant, and that is that in the context of the EEZ Act, tikanga is a relevant legal authority that has to be relevant legal system that has to be taken into account, along with all the treaty matters and things like that. So between the Supreme Court judgment and the opportunity that others will have for comment, we think the panel will get some very good high quality guidance on those matters.
Okay, appreciate the response. Thank you.
Is it, Mitch, do you think it might be worth in Finbar adding those exact comments into the submission that, you know, we're deferring the mātauranga Māori aspects to the parties that are better situated to provide that advice, and also acknowledge the past, So at least the panel understands, and our iwi understand that it's been taken into consideration. We understand the lane that we're staying in, but we recognise that the panel should be getting that good information from other sources. I think a good point, Mitch. It would just help to acknowledge that the council has considered those issues.
Agreed.
Ka pai.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Craig?
Yeah, thank you. So excellent feedback that we've given, I believe, and I think we're in a privileged position in that we were able to start this process early, knowing how likely it was that we were going to be asked for our comments. I do wonder whether some of the other parties are going to have enough time to complete their comments. I wonder, noting that it's only supposed to be 20 days, I believe, since when it was announced, which was like a week ago. So I know what we've done would have taken more than, well, a lot longer than 20 days, I'm sure. So I imagine a lot of groups will be leaning on us, perhaps, and our comments will be de facto comments for them. But yes, I do agree with the three slight changes that we've made to insert the monitoring enforcement paragraph, to strengthen the language, as Mitch suggested, and yes, and even if some of the iwi hapi don't have time to come back with full comments, they'll certainly, if we're referring to the expert panel that they should be addressed by them, then hopefully they'll give them more time to do that if they haven't had time yet. So I'm happy with all of those three slight changes.
Kia ora, Craig. Tuhia, back to you.
Yeah, so I might just clarify that first point I made around the economic impacts. Could we also add, so at 4.3 recommendations, it's got 29 D to G. If we could add another one that said something like seek detail or clarification on the economic costs of fisheries, tourism, recreation and human health.
So fisheries, tourism, sorry, what were the other two?
Oh, recreation and human health.
Through you, Chair, I think that's definitely within scope of what we could say and would assist the panel.
Any other comments? I've got a few. Got a list. Grant?
Well, maybe you should do your list first. I'll summarise that.
Oh, no, you go.
Well, thank you. Firstly, through you, Chair, I'll just, sitting back, 2 weeks ago we had TTR at our council going through and explaining for a whole hour of everything that they're doing. But I've got to congratulate the council here for their absolute considered approach. And there is huge emotion that's attached with everything. But I have real confidence, not only in the recommendations, but also in the ability of the panel. And I certainly support all the recommendations that are in here and what's been brought up. But I'm certainly interested to hear if you have a different view on that. But really, the real biggie, like I want to say, I want to congratulate the council because I think you've approached it right and you've taken some flack, and but been very, very balanced and very smart, and well done. You've stuck to your guns and you're going to have a bigger say later on. I see it. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you. I actually had a conversation with Finbar. I missed the deadline to get my feedback in, so we had a quick conversation last week. about a few things, but a few of the issues that I have, one of the biggest issues I have is around the actual economic impact into the areas that are most affected. And while we're talking about a regional impact around Taranaki, we were told the same thing with the Kupe development, and all of these promises were made to South Taranaki, and very little of that was actually delivered. So the economic benefit may come to the region, or it may go to Whanganui, but South Taranaki may miss out, as what happened with that major project where jobs were promised, but people were literally being bussed in and vanned in and flown in from New Plymouth and the rest of the country for that project. So very little economic benefit came directly to the area that was most affected. So that's one of my biggest questions, and that may be something that Doug can help with, I see there's a 0.34 GDP contribution for South Taranaki and Whanganui. Has that been further extrapolated to actually understand how much of that will go to each area? That's one of my economic questions. The plume corridor always intrigues me. It's a bit like going, the old days when you went to a restaurant or you sat on a plane in the smoking or the non-smoking section. How does the plume know when it's to stop? So that's, it's just an intriguing question. And yes, while the currents and the winds may tell it to go one way, we all know our southern winds and those stormy seas that constantly push things onto the shore. And I also refer back to the whale stranding, the mass whale stranding we had in 2018. They wouldn't have been that far out from the shore to have 13 sperm whales strand on our South Taranaki beaches. They must have been closer to shore when that storm hit for them to have been washed in where they were. So lots of missing information, lots of anecdotal evidence and knowledge, lots of mātauranga Māori that sits within our communities that I think, although now with this application not as highly weighted, is still really significant. So I look forward to those sorts of things coming out too. I'm grateful for the Morrison report that we can refer to and delve deeper into, and I'm grateful for the work that everyone's put into this. The huge amount of work, Finbar, that you and your team have done, thank you all, to put us in the best possible position to be commenting on this and to stay involved in the process. So congratulations to everybody who's been involved. Long way to go yet, whānau. Might be a few more bouts, what do you call them, rounds in the ring before this is done. But congratulations to everyone who's been a part of it and been so interested and dedicated and committed to getting this work done. And that's my little soapbox. So coming back to you, Doug, any further extrapolation on that GDP impact and where it actually might sit as opposed to the regional approach?
Kia ora. No, I mean, analyses of this sort, have quite a few assumptions behind them. And often those assumptions just sort of sneak through. But, one of the assumptions here is this is what the impact's going to be, and therefore it will accrue to South Taranaki, but may not. We've heard that there is scope for quite a lot of the actual operation itself to be fairly self-contained, and just something that's seen offshore without necessarily having a lot of impact on the local economy. So yeah, it's certainly another area of uncertainty.
Great, thanks. So that's GDP potentially generated in the district, not necessarily landing in the district and being felt in the district.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair. So the applicant has put forward 2 consent conditions that broadly relate to this. They have proposed that they would provide a $50,000 donation to the South Taranaki District Council every year to go towards various community activities. And then the other one, they've said that they will set up a training facility in South Taranaki to support people to gain the skills to then be recruited on the operation. I think it's fair to say that both of those conditions will get a bit of a test throughout the process, and if the panel decides to grant it, they would be ones that you would definitely give a good tire kicking to in terms of their practical benefit to the community and how they might be strengthened to help address some of those issues that you've raised.
Thank you. And this is where I get the whole deja vu
some more norms.
Totally deja vu thing again. So that's one of my biggest concerns is if it comes down to the money now, then where's the guarantee that our people will be ones that will be benefiting, taking on all the risk and seeing none of the benefit potentially. Kapo, how are we going? Anybody else got any more questions, queries? Grant?
Just through you, Chair. So the changes that you'll be making, that they'll be come back out to us.
Well, I was going to ask that. I mean, they're relatively tight in scope, so I was going to test your comfort. The possibility it could just be delegated to the chief executive and perhaps the chair to agree them, since they're pretty tight in scope, would maybe be my recommendation.
Can we, Craig, I and Steve, is everyone happy with the three of us taking a look at that final document? Do we need to make an amendment?
Just through you, Chair. Sorry. So can those amendments actually be sent out to us? So just the short amendments rather than the whole lot being out.
Would you like that, I guess,
and happy for them to go ahead through there, but just so we've got a copy of it.
Yeah, so once approved by the three, we can send out a revised submission with a summary of exactly what's changed at the top.
We need to formalise that?
I'd add another resolution, delegates to the council chair, PMP chief executive, with the authority to approve the final submission.
You happy to move that, Grant? Seconder? Donna, thank you. All in favour? Any against? That's carried. Thank you, team, for that faith. Okay, here we go. Moving to the resolutions. Recommendations on page 6 that the Taranaki Regional Council A receives the memorandum titled Taranaki VTM Project Written Comment, endorses the written comment in attachment 1 as per this latest set of amendments, agrees further engagement on the application be exercised by the Chief Executive under delegation, determines that this decision be recognised as not significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act 2002, determines that it has complied with the decision-making provisions of the Local Government Act 2002 to the extent necessary in relation to this decision, and in accordance with Section 79 of the Act, determines that it does not require further information, further assessment of options, or further analysis of costs and benefits or advantages and disadvantages prior to making a decision on this matter. I'll move those recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Celine, thank you. All in favour, please say aye.
And plus we're adding F, what we just...
And the F.
Yes.
Any against? That's carried. Thank you, team. Exhale for a little bit. Again, thank you all for your commitment, your dedication to the staff and our experts who are both in the room and online. Thank you for your considered approach to assisting the council with our work, and we look forward to potentially working with you in the future. Kia ora. That's the end of our hui. At the last hui, when Donna chaired, I did make a statement just to say thank you to everybody, but again in person, just once again to reiterate my thanks to especially our staff, Steve and your team, for all the hard work that's been done this term, our councillors, those who are retiring, those who are returning potentially, all the best for this break. Happy campaigning, dare I say that. All the best to those of you who are going on to do other things and take care of yourselves and your whānau. Kia ora tātou. So we'll move into the karakia whakamutunga. Yeah, sorry, closing karakia. Right. Kia uru mai, ahau ora, ahau kaha, ahau maia. Ki runga, ki raro, ki roto, ki waho, rire rire hau, hai mārire. Kia ora tātou. See you for council meeting. Thanks, team. Kia ora koutou. Thanks.